Hello, this is Greg Allison Green Greg's coming to you on the 29th of January 21. Time on deck, 194800 hours Central Standard Time. And tonight I want to bring you special guest Craig Douglas. Now, Craig Douglas is a prepper, but his main thing is radiation detection equipment. I met Mr. Douglas at a prepper show, and he had quite a inventory and a lot of different radiation detection devices. He was quite knowledgeable of all these devices and the use of them and the threat posed by radiological events. And given the things going on in the world today, I think it's a real good time to talk about that on my channel because, guys, I talk about power grid. I talk about the risk to our power grid and how that's a risk at our nuclear power plants and how even the spent fuel rod pulls is something that really concerns me. And I've talked a lot about right now, recently, the tensions that we're having in Europe, which very well could, in the opinions of some of my latest guests, lead to a war with Russia, and it could get ugly. It could go nuclear. I'm hoping that don't happen, but this is insurance for just in case. Sometimes you need to have a good understanding about a radiological event, and the fact that we could have a radiological event could occur from other things too. Our nuclear power plants do have some risk factors. I mean, they're engineered to be safe within certain things, but sometimes they don't account for things like the big wave they had in Fukushima. And there's a lot of misinformation out there about these plants and the kind of events associated with them. And Craig Douglas is going to help straighten some of that out with us tonight, but he'll also talk about his knowledge, radio detection in general, the kind of devices he has. I'm going to kind of leave it up to him. It's going to be a free format, and we may come back and I may do a live session with him later, maybe this week, in which we get to talk about or have a good question and answer session for you in the audience. If you're interested in that, we'll definitely look into that. Now, I am going to do another interview with John Hollerman. We're looking at Thursday, I believe. So, no, Wednesday. I'm going to do an interview with John Hollerman on Wednesday, and we're going to have Dr. Arthur Bradley on next week to talk about how to protect your home and your vehicles and things like that from an EMP event or even a solar CME. So we got a lot of stuff coming up here. The threat of what we're facing seems to be pretty considerable right now. So to get more videos on these kind of things, please subscribe to my channel, bang the notification bell, and click all. And I've got videos about things you can do, including gardening and things you can survive on your own with. And I'll be doing more on that. But right now, while the supply chain is still operating, I would highly suggest you go to prepwithgreg.com because right now we got a real good special. You can get $150 off a 3-month supply of this long-lasting food that lasts 25 years. You get 2,000 calories a day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. That's a deal to make you a winner. And I'll tell you, they still got supplies. They've got the broadest selection at at My Patriot Supply for prepping supplies for the food storage especially. They are really the best when it comes to long-term food storage. And so you go to prepwithgreg.com. That's what that'll take you into. So you can click on the My Patriot Supply logo above that. It'll take you into their site with all their other broad spectrum of things they offer for prepping for long-term food storage. But you get the specials when you go through prepwithgreg.com, and it helps me and my channel if you go into their system through prepwithgreg.com. Anyway, having said that, I'll waste no further time. Mr. Douglas also, after I met him at the prepping conferences, I got him to come to one of my first Power Grid Defense conference. He was actually a vendor at my very first Power Grid Defense conference way back in 2016. That's been 6 years ago. We've been working trying to get our power grid safe for some time. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'll give you Craig Douglas. Craig, what do you think about radiological defense, radiological detection? What do people need to be aware of?
Well, usually now in the prepper mind, usually with radiation, we're worried about 3 different things potentially. We're worried about possibly nuclear war, of course. We're worried about possible nuclear power plant accidents, and we're worried about dirty bombs. These are the 3 things you might want to prepare for. Now, on my YouTube channel and everything I do, I don't ever fear monger, so I don't try to push anyone in any particular direction. I'm trying to just get information out there. So if you believe any of these things could happen, you have the means and the knowledge to do something about it, because there's so much lies and misinformation about anything nuclear and radiation. It's just a mess. I even have a whole channel where I debunk a lot of lies about nuclear energy and Fukushima and these sort of things. So I want to attack this with a prepper mindset of, if you believe any of these things could happen, you may want to prepare for these. I'm not suggesting you have to, because frankly, I'm not really worried about most of these things personally, but that's just my own personal opinion, even though I am a prepper. I was actually more worried about this stuff until I learned more about radiation and what nuclear devices do and how nuclear power plants melt down. So I was a little more worried about it when I first started getting into prepping, but now I'm not really that worried about it. Of course, when I started it was called survivalism, but they had to come up with a new name, I guess. But anyway, but before we start any of this, there's going to have to be a little bit of basic education I'm going to have to go through, that we're going to have to get through. And some of you may already know this, but bear with me, because again, a lot of us have been lied to through 50 years of anti-nuke media. There's been a lot of misinformation out there. So the very basics to start out with, though, there's 4 kinds of radiation that you may want to be concerned about with any of these 3 events, the possible events I'm talking about: alpha radiation, beta radiation, gamma radiation, and X-ray, which is radiation as well. These are the 4 radiations you may have to be prepared for, and they all have different methods you need to utilize to prepare yourself from them in some sort of emergency situation. All 3 of them have a little bit different components to them that you need to be concerned about. So alpha radiation is a type of radiation. These are all what they call ionizing radiation, radiation that can penetrate or get into your body and could do damage to it. Alpha radiation is usually very easily blocked by even a piece of paper. Your skin also blocks alpha radiation from getting into your body. You can ingest alpha radiation, which is bad, but for alpha radiation, all 3 of those incidents I'm talking about isn't that big of a concern to need to have to prepare for. But to block alpha radiation, your skin does that. And as far as your insides, you don't want to breathe it in, basically. So basically, all I have to do is wear a respirator. And we're all pretty familiar with masks and an N95 mask and all this. And that can actually be effective against alpha radiation. So alpha radiation isn't a big concern with any 3 of those events, either nuclear power plants, nuclear bombs, or dirty bombs. It's not that big of an issue to have to prepare for, to protect yourself from, but I'm trying to give you an idea of how you can, because alpha radiation isn't as dangerous unless you ingest it to you or your body or your loved ones. The next one is beta radiation. Beta radiation is what generally will, in a nuclear situation, especially nuclear bombs, is what we call fallout. Beta radiation attaches to a particle. This particle floats up into the air and usually comes down on something, either you or your roof or whatever, the ground, your vegetables, as a particle, a piece of dust. And this dust is radioactive. It's carrying what we call beta radiation. Beta radiation is more penetrating to the skin, not quite as much as let's say some of the others we're going to talk about, like X-ray later. But beta radiation will penetrate the skin and penetrate into your body somewhat. It's fairly easy to block. You can block it with, like, say, for instance, the roof of your house. Most everybody has a house that has probably 1/2-inch plywood or 5/8 plywood or 1/2-inch OSB plywood. That's enough to stop the beta radiation. It doesn't take a lot. A piece of plywood can stop beta radiation. Beta radiation is also bad if you breathe in those dusts. Of course, you don't want to do that either. So then you would, again, a respirator is how you stop those beta dusts from getting into your body, or the fallout. If it gets on your skin, and if it stays on your skin, it can burn your skin over time. The easy remediation of that is to simply go into somewhere where you can wash it off. Brush it off if you can, wash it off. Your clothes can help stop beta radiation, although it will penetrate clothing. Something like a rain suit can help there. You see in the movies and decontamination where they wear these Tyvek suits or rain suits, that can be effective for beta radiation up to a point. If it stays on a long time, it can still penetrate the suit a little, but it's still giving you some protection. So a protection of a mask and clothing, especially a type that has like a rain suit, rubberized clothing, is a great protection for beta radiation. But frankly, being in your house is a good protection from beta radiation, because it'll be on your roof, but it's not going to be getting you. But it can seep into your house through all the cracks and crevices of the doorways and so on, because every house is not 100% secure. Okay, so beta radiation is is the main component you're going to see with fallout. When you hear the word fallout, they're basically talking about beta radiation. The next type of radiation I'm going to talk about is gamma radiation. Gamma radiation is highly penetrating. And in fact, when I'm saying gamma radiation, you can almost think of gamma radiation and X-ray as the same. And a lot of you are fairly familiar with X-ray. We know that we can take a picture right through your body, right inside your body with an X-ray. Gamma radiation and X-ray radiation are very, very close in frequency, and they behave essentially the same way. And actually, they're detected pretty much the same way too, with the same type of equipment. Gamma radiation goes right through you, right through walls. The things that help stop gamma radiation is a more intense shielding. If you're in a gamma situation, gamma radiation, in your house, you have almost no protection from gamma radiation. It goes right through the walls of your house. If you have a concrete house, something more massive, it's better protection, but it's still going through those walls as well. The best place to be to protect yourself from gamma radiation would be behind a lot of mass. And the easiest way to do that essentially is being underground. That's the easiest way to protect them from gamma radiation. In fact, you can have almost 100% protection from gamma radiation and X-ray being in underground. Wearing a suit doesn't do anything for you for gamma radiation. That's another myth in movies. It's the high gamma event, and they're in there with their Tyvek or rain suit looking things with the masks and the hoods, and no, that doesn't do a thing. Or a space suit out in space doesn't protect you from gamma radiation whatsoever. It has to be massive. That's why lead is used a lot. There's more mass in a half inch of lead than there is 2 or 3 inches of wood. You see, it depends on the weight, basically. The more mass you have between you and the gamma source, the better you are. So if you're underground, first of all, if you're underground, you're probably in a concrete structure to begin with. And then you're also have earth all the way around you and potentially above you too. And then you really don't have to worry about gamma radiation. And it doesn't, if you have a, let's say you have a, up here, I'm from Michigan right now. Up in the north, we have basements are pretty common. They probably aren't nearly as common as where Greg lives, but we have basements. And usually basements, you're about 5 feet underground and maybe 2 feet above ground. They have these little windows up at the top of the walls, right before it starts the main floor of the next story. And you could have that window wide open, and the window open or closed doesn't make any difference. But if you just duck down, see, gamma travels in a straight line. It's a ray. It doesn't go in that window. If you're sitting down in your basement, it might be going right over your head, and of no concern to you. Even though, in other words, you could be sitting underground with no roof on your head, and you could be protected.
I've lost you.
That's not the case, because you would have been deadly. There was an airburst right above you. So you could have no roof on your head at all and be protected from gamma rays if you're below grade, but that won't protect you from beta. So you do need something above your head. So I'm not suggesting don't, but the point here is, let's say you're caught out in the open and there is a nuclear bomb. You can protect yourself by going, if you could see a mushroom cloud, you know which direction the blast was from. And then you can go under a bridge viaduct where if you get behind something massive and where you can't see that mushroom cloud anymore, you are going to be protected from the gamma radiation. So gamma radiation, though, is the most deadly. That's what really kills most people. If you're exposed to a certain level and it all really depends on your exposure level and the time you're exposed as to how dangerous that event is. Because you can be in very high radiation level events for short periods of time and survive just fine. But if you're in that event, if it may register something like 500 Roentgens an hour. 500 Roentgens would be death probably if you were exposed to that for an hour. But if you were just to go outside and test and find out it's 500 Roentgens and come back inside, you're not getting 500 Roentgens. You may only be getting 1 or 2 Roentgens. So you're much more protected if you spend less time in the event in a gamma situation. Okay, so those are the major ones, and I can touch on all these later too as we go along. But alpha, beta, gamma, and X-ray. Gamma being the most deadly one. That's the one you really want to concentrate for a nuclear bomb. And pretty much that's it. The nuclear bomb is actually the most deadly of the three we're talking about. Remember, nuclear bomb, nuclear power plant, and a dirty bomb. Gamma radiation is the most deadly, and a nuclear bomb is probably the most deadly of the three that I'm talking about right now. And I'm not suggesting you run out and get a shelter in your backyard. I kind of am against the idea of shelters because, frankly, most of you already have the means now to equip your own home to be a good shelter against an atomic blast. Now, the shelters are more useful if you are closer to the radius, closer to the epicenter. Forget about trying to withstand a blast if it's direct, if you're ground, what they call ground zero. Forget about it. You don't have enough money, and you don't have enough. The pressures are so tremendous, it blows in all the doors and windows, even if you have a really well-built shelter. So forget about trying to survive if you're at ground zero. And that would usually be a city or near a military base or some other target. And by the way, targets, don't go by these old Cold War charts of what targets were, because the targets today might be completely something different today. We have a different, from 50 years ago, we have a different situation today. So those may not be the same targets as they were on the old school charts from back during the Cold War era. So being below grade or something with a lot of mass is really what you need. When a nuclear blast, let's talk about nuclear bombs, because that seems to be what most people seem to want to protect themselves from, a nuclear bomb. Nuclear bombs have been with us now for forever. Only 2 have really been used in war. Can you still see me? Because I just lost signal here.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay.
You're good.
I can't see Greg anymore, but okay, if you can still see me, that's fine. Okay.
You're talking, so you're the only one going to be seen anyway.
Okay. Well, if you can see me, if you can hear me and see me, I guess we're fine.
You're
All
good.
right. Let's talk about nuclear bombs first. Nuclear bombs, the first atomic bombs, they came into hydrogen bombs. They've changed the name. Bombs got bigger and bigger. Of course, not Fukushima, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, they were used on humans, very destructive. That was our first introduction to them. And then over the next several decades, a lot of testing. And then finally they banned the above ground, they banned the nuclear testing. And now we haven't really, other than North Korea, we really haven't had any nuclear testing in several decades now. And so you don't really have to worry about all the damage from those is already done if you want to consider that damage. I highly disagree with a lot of these charts that they showed. There was a lot of fear mongering going on during the Cold War, a lot of fear mongering. And I disagree with a lot of these charts that show these fallout circles. Okay, first of all, with fallout with a nuclear device, there's a lot to cover here. I hope I'm doing this okay, and I hope we don't take too much time. I'm trying to keep it fairly simple and organized if I can, without notes. When a nuclear bomb is detonated, if it comes from the air, it's coming possibly from Soviet Union or China or Russia rather, wherever it's coming from, it comes from the sky, and they have 2 types of bursts. One is called an air burst and one is called a ground burst. The ground burst basically, as you can imagine, hits the ground or maybe even penetrates the ground and blows up, and it creates a whole lot of dirt and dust that comes into the atmosphere. So you have a lot more fallout with a ground burst. But if it's air burst, usually they're detonated hundreds of feet above the ground, and they burst in the air, and they don't create as much of a dust or much of a mushroom cloud. There isn't as much fallout. See, fallout again is the dust. So the fallout, you'll have less fallout if it's an air burst and more if it's a ground burst. But the ground burst, fortunately, kills a lot less people from gamma. In fact, it kills very little from gamma, because gamma radiation wouldn't even hardly be present at all, because it'd be there and it would hit the ground, and it would be the ground itself would shield people from gamma radiation. Where it's an air burst, and usually the ones for military applications between Soviet Union and US back in the 50s and 60s were generally designed to be air bursts, meaning they're burst in the air, and they create the most death and destruction because of them being exposed, being blown up in the air, and the radiation would be emitting from that, and the gamma radiation, which would be the most deadly. Plus, of course, there's the flashlight and the blast and the blast wave, pressure wave, which will knock down buildings. The closer you are, of course, the more likely you are to be destroyed. So usually the ones for warfare back in the Cold War were usually designed to be air bursts. So then you have more gamma radiation, but less beta radiation. And again, gamma is the most dangerous. Now, if you are, let's say you're, I shouldn't pick on any city. So let's just say you do live near a big city and that city just got nuked, and you see the mushroom cloud. First of all, I suggest take potassium iodate right away, but then we can get into that later if we have time, because you need to take it before you're exposed. You see that burst, and you know you're already getting gamma radiation, And there will be beta radiation coming when that cloud, depending on which way the wind's blowing, you'll get more or less in some other place. But if this wind's coming your way, then you're definitely going to be getting some beta radiation. So if you have a basement, go into the basement and you're going to be protected from the gamma radiation. Unless, let's say you have a walkout basement and it's exposed to the city in question that just got nuked. Well, then you have virtually no protection. So see, but because there you're exposed, you have a glass window in front of you or a bunch of glass, and the glass is no protection. Whereas if it's on the other side of the house, the other direction, you're going to be fine in your basement. Even if you have windows, you're going to be fine in your basement. And all you have to do is basically, if you stand up in your basement, you might be getting gamma radiation to the upper part of your body. So you just sit down or lay down in your basement. And frankly, you don't have to spend the rest of your life in a shelter or a basement. You really, for a single burst, one that's not a burst that's not, in other words, it's not a continuing war, you really only have to stay down there about a week or two at the most to really have to worry about radiation exposure from a nuclear detonation from a bomb. It's not as bad as you were taught and what you thought you knew based on all the fear mongering you've been getting all your life. So, and they are very survivable. I picked up some numbers off of an article that somebody I know I trust very well in Texas who also specializes in this type of topic. He wrote an article talking about a 10 kiloton bomb in Washington, D.C. Now, 10 kiloton is a little bit smaller than what was detonated on both Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but here's something about the power levels. Don't be scared by when they talk about 100 kiloton bombs or 1,000 kiloton, whatever. Don't be worried about those numbers because frankly, even though the bombs got bigger and bigger, and that's what made us kind of give up in the 60s. And when the bombs just got so big, it's like, oh, it's 100 times bigger than the Hiroshima bomb. And it's like, we finally just threw up our hands in the air. Okay, well, we can't survive it, so why bother trying? So yeah, just go ahead and nuke me, I don't care. And that's kind of where the negative attitude came in to where we don't even try to prepare anymore, but they are very survivable. So a 10 kiloton, but the point that I was trying to get there is, even though the bombs got bigger and bigger and bigger, the actual destructive force didn't follow the same curve as the power level did. There was a leveling out at some point because frankly, the atmospheric conditions really stopped the bomb from being a big problem because it has to overcome the physics of the atmosphere. And it just wasn't doing what they were leading you to believe it was doing with adding zeros to the numbers of the kilotons that the bomb would be effective on. So don't worry about how big the bomb is because it's not really that relative. And that's something you probably hadn't heard before either. But a 10 kiloton nuclear bomb airburst over Washington, D.C. This is just an example because this was in his article. So in the District of Criminals, 15,000 people would probably be immediately killed. 15,000 people. About another 15,000 roughly, and these are rough numbers, of course. About another 15,000 would be casualties, either from radiation burns, from the optical, from the blast itself or collapsed building of that nature, anything of that nature, because certain radiuses will have different levels of destruction. At ground zero, if you're a 10 kiloton bomb, if you're within a few blocks or maybe a half mile of that, more than likely everything's going to be completely leveled and nobody will survive, even if you're on the ground, unless you have a huge blast door and a massive concrete structure. You're not going to survive it if you're near ground zero. But if you're a little bit away, you're going to have to worry about the blast because you get that flash of light and then you get a pressure wave that is, 600 mile per hour hot wind. Now, how does that sound? And then a few seconds later, it'll come the other direction, that same wind. So this is the most destructive part for the people who are near ground zero. They may not be killed, but you could easily be killed by flying debris, from the radiation. Now you won't die of the radiation right away. You will die a week or two later from radiation poisoning, acute radiation syndrome. But you won't die. You won't die from radiation immediately. That's another thing that people the movies always get wrong. Seeing Spock there and he does whatever he does and he dies of radiation within 5 minutes of the film. No. He would die weeks later. That's the way that would really work. But anyway, then about another 250,000 though around Washington, D.C. would be in danger of being injured if they didn't know what to do. And the thing about those numbers I just gave you, the reality of the situation is 99% of the people in the District of Criminals would have survived. Because hopefully it's the right ones. They would have survived. So why are you so scared about these nuclear bombs? Now, if several bombs bursting around Washington, D.C., okay, more and more people would be killed. The situation isn't the same today as what we would have had when all this fear mongering started with nuclear war. And the whole, so blast wave, that's what's going to kill a lot of people. But the lingering radiation in the fall, depending which way the wind's blowing, and the wind will change directions. Luckily, if it was Washington, D.C., most of the wind would be going out towards the Atlantic Ocean, so there wouldn't be a whole lot of people affected later from beta radiation, or what we call fallout. This is something that a lot of people we've been brainwashed all our lives with this fear mongering about nuclear war and also about nuclear winter. Here's another thing that's going to shock you. You just have to start looking into it. The nuclear winter thing is really a meme that doesn't apply. It really isn't true. The idea there, first of all, is you need to have all this dust and dirt go up into the air. So it'd have to be a lot of ground bursts as opposed to air bursts. And that wasn't the case. They were mostly air bursts anyway. By the way, every single, I think I read a figure once, if we not detonated every single nuclear device we had all at once in the same place, it still wouldn't even equal the power of a hurricane, a massive hurricane. Okay, that's something else you can look into, another fun fact. But this nuclear device, let's see, where was I going? I got a little off track there. Where was I going with it? I lost it. Okay, well, the nuclear winter. The nuclear winter thing is really a falsehood. Think about this too. There's already been thousands of nuclear bombs detonated on this planet. Where's your nuclear winter? And why do you think you have 1,000-mile stretches of fallout, beta radiation, that's going to kill everybody in its path when, well, gee, didn't they used to test in the Nevada desert, above ground tests in the Utah desert and New Mexico and Arizona? Well, wait a minute. How come people in the neighboring states didn't all die? Colorado, Arkansas, Louisiana, Kansas, Nebraska, Wyoming. Why didn't all these people die? You see, because it wasn't what it was portrayed to be. We didn't have to evacuate Utah every time they detonated something in Nevada, right? Didn't happen, and nobody died. Well, you could argue that we all were exposed to some more radiation. Yes, we were exposed to some radiation, but here's something else to think about. When you talk about fallout, these become, when these are some of the heaviest isotopes. When the isotopes attached to these pieces of dust, that piece of dust becomes some of the heaviest particles ever known to man, and it tends to drop out of the sky pretty quickly, and it doesn't linger for thousands of miles in the atmosphere. And like the whole Fukushima meme just drive me crazy. Oh, Fukushima is decimating the West Coast because somehow this radiation is going up into the jet stream and it's flowing over the Atlantic Ocean and it's dropping down on the California coast. Completely wrong. No, it doesn't stay suspended that long. Very little of it will actually go very far. That's why they didn't have to evacuate Utah when they detonated hundreds of nuclear bombs in Nevada and thousands of nuclear bombs worldwide. So I get a little excited about this possibly, and maybe this is good, maybe it's not, but I'm trying to get you to understand some realities that you probably didn't know about, or that you were told wrong all your life to sell you something. I do sell things, but I don't try to sell things. I try to give people information, give them the truth, because frankly, I don't want to be seen as a fear monger or somebody who's trying to scare you to sell you something. So, okay, so that's nuclear bombs in a nutshell. And I'm sure I missed a lot of things. I'm trying to cover this quickly. How about nuclear power plant accidents? Okay, nuclear power plant accidents. We've had some, and we've had a lot more than you are aware of. The ones that I could name that you would have heard of would be 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, and Fukushima. Those are the ones you've heard of. There's dozens more that you didn't hear of, including right here in the US where I'm from, one that happened in Idaho that actually killed people. No one was killed in 3 Mile Island. Nobody got cancer from 3 Mile Island. This is going to shock a lot of you people too, because you were led to believe the last 50 plus years that radiation bad, nuclear power plants bad, you're going to die. Not the case at all. No one was injured or died from 3 Mile Island radiation. It was almost a non-event, but it was a huge news headlines. More radiation was released in a lot of different other accidents that have happened in the US and worldwide. Chernobyl was a whole different story. That was in 1986, and there a lot of people did die. Not a lot, actually. Less than 50 people died of acute radiation syndrome, and that was pretty much only the first responders, the ones that were there right at the moment, fighting the fire. I can see you now, finally. Oh, you just disappeared again. I don't know what's happening. But if you can still hear me, we're good. You can still hear me, right?
Yep.
Okay. All right. People did die from Chernobyl radiation because the radiation was actually released in some kind of quantity that you can measure. And there was some fallout that happened to go over other countries downwind. Nobody in any of those other countries died. Nobody in those other countries got cancer even later in life. And very few people actually probably got cancer even being right near the plant. And that may surprise the hell out of a lot of you too. The whole fallout meme from nuclear power plants is not entirely true as well. Chernobyl was a case that was probably the worst kind of nuclear release you'll ever see in world history in the future as well. And the reason for that is all nuclear power plants today, and by that I mean just about every single nuclear power plant in this world is working on old technology from the 50s and 60s, okay? They're all old. Almost all of them are really old. But all of them, except some of those types of reactors that were in Chernobyl, they all have what they call containment vessels. These are huge steel and concrete structures where the reactor is inside, that if there is a meltdown, most of the radiation will stay within that vessel. That's why, fast forwarding to Fukushima, 11 years ago, no one died from Fukushima radiation either, because even though they had three complete meltdowns, Chernobyl was only one, and it wasn't even really a meltdown, it was literally an explosion. When you build your nuclear reactor in a damn tool shed, you kind of have to expect this kind of thing to happen. That's the safety wasn't quite as good, and the type of design, the reactor design was a lot different than the rest of the world used. But at Fukushima, we saw no deaths due to radiation and no cancer increase. Over 15,000 people died of that earthquake and tsunami, but zero radiation deaths. But they keep putting these numbers out in the press and make you think all these deaths happen to be a nuclear power plant disaster in Fukushima. Well, wait a minute. We had an accident here in town a couple days ago that killed more people than Fukushima did. I don't remember hearing that, all big news all over the world. And here's another thing that's going to shock the hell out of a lot of you, because you don't know this more than likely. I'm sorry if I'm being too condescending sometimes, but this information is pretty much not known throughout the world by most people. The evacuations of Fukushima and Chernobyl were largely completely unnecessary. Chernobyl, about 80% of the evacuations were unnecessary. At Fukushima, 100% of the evacuations were unnecessary. In fact, 1,500 people roughly died because they evacuated. That's right, from people that were in elderly care and hospitals and trying to move people. The rushed evacuation killed about 1,500 people, where the actual radiation killed no one. And if everybody had stayed put, no one would have died from radiation either. They could all have returned to their homes immediately. It's probably a wise move to evacuate people. I'm not suggesting they should never evacuate it, but they should have, when they found out how low the radiation level was, they should have allowed people to be right back into their homes the next day when they found out, oh, this isn't bad. The highest radiation dose, if you want to do some research, the highest radiation dose anybody in the whole planet got from Fukushima radiation was 670 millisieverts of radiation. That may not mean anything to a lot of people, but you certainly can't die from that. And you don't even have what they call the what is called the nuclear radiation. Oh, I forgot the name of the terminology. Where you reach a certain threshold of radiation and you have a 5% chance of developing cancer later in your life.
That's right.
The threshold level. You remember? You know what it's called?
You're talking about the dose rate, the total dose received.
Not really dose. No, it's not dose rate. Well, it's a dose, but there's something threshold level. I'm sorry, I don't remember it. Unfortunately, I forgot the terminology here. But the highest radiation anybody in the world got from Fukushima was, with 3 full meltdowns, was only 670 millisieverts, which can't kill anybody and won't even give you a 5% chance of having an increase of cancer later in your lifetime. I know a lot of people are probably kicking and screaming, thinking, well, that's not true. That's not true. Well, I always challenge. I have one particular channel where I challenge people all the time from all this stuff. And I always give references and show links and show that what I'm telling is truth. And people have not been able to show me otherwise. But it makes a lot of people mad, because so many people were lied to all their life, and we have these fixed beliefs in our minds that it's all going to kill us. And that's why we need to be anti-nuke. When in fact, and this is a whole other topic, but then we're not really get into it, we really should be going back to nuclear energy if we buy into this idea of a climate crisis and we need to get rid of fossil fuels, then we need to be going to nuclear. And believe me, I'm all for solar, photovoltaics, and wind and electric cars. I've had 4 electric cars in my lifetime. Back in the 70s, I've had electric cars and photovoltaics and solar. I've been into this since the 70s. So I know a lot about solar. We do need solar, we do need wind, but we really, really need nuclear. But they're trying to convince them so we don't. The greenies are having a hard time with this. Even Michael Moore in his latest film, Planet of the Humans, refused to even mention nuclear. It was really funny. He just stayed away from the topic completely, because when you're left-wing liberal, this might be what you have to do. I don't know. But we need nuclear energy. Anyway, this is my opinion on this, but frankly, the more you learn about nuclear energy, the more you realize that no one should be anti-nuke. If you want to be anti-nuke about nuclear weapons, that's a whole different story. Anybody could safely be anti-nuke against nuclear weapons, probably, but not about nuclear energy, because you haven't learned the basics. You don't understand. So 3 full meltdowns, Fukushima, nobody should have been evacuated. Nobody would have died. Nobody's going to die, even though it's going to take decades to clean up that mess. It's in a containment vessel. There was some leakage and there was some registered on the outside, and some people got some exposures, but the highest one wasn't even enough to hurt anybody.
Okay, so with Fukushima, they still had a society, things were still under control, and they're been able to, get fire trucks in there and pump water into those spent fuel rod pools. Now, that's what I already worry about. The spent fuel rod pools are outside the containment building, and it's not always spent. We call them spent fuel rod pools. That's really a misnomer, because they also stage fresh fuel rods that will go into the plant, into those pools before they install them. And a lot of those rods are still pretty hot when they first come out of the plant. That's the thing I worry about more than and a lot of people get confused. When I talk about nuclear power plants, I don't even talk about the reactors, and that confuses a lot of people. I just talked about the spent fuel rod pool plant, spent fuel rods, and I talk about the fact that they're covered with zircaloy cladding, and the zircaloy cladding, when it's hot, not cold, when it's hot, it will burn contact with air. And they got 20 foot of water over these pools to prevent that, and they got the pumps that run, and they got backup generators. But what I worry about is if you have a full societal collapse to a grid down situation nationwide from the MP or something like that, then eventually you're going to run out of fuel, and this water will evaporate, and these get exposed to the air. And when you're talking about the nuclear, I also have mentioned in the past that if you have a nuclear war, you can go outside in 2 weeks. I've said that on my channel in recent videos. But what I worry about with these spent fuel rods is that they're going to be giving off radiation for some time. It's going to take a while for them to burn down completely and burn off. So this is going to be a radiological event that will take place over a longer period of time. And granted, the heavier particles do fall out closer to the source. Strontium-90 being one that people are most concerned about, because strontium has an affinity for calcium. And if you happen to ingest it, it's going to go in your bone and stay there. And you got a permanent radio emitter inside of your, I don't mean like TV radio, I'm talking about a radiological ionizing radiation emitter lodged into your bones. And you don't want to ingest anything that's got strontium-90 in it. So you don't want to be eating animal bones if the animals have been in the area of a radiological event, because that calcium within them is going to have it. And you definitely need to wash off anything you're worried about, but it will fall out closer to the plant. So I wouldn't be eating anything close to it. How far do you think the strontium-90 would make it?
Okay, well, let me start about nuclear spent fuel rods, which is what we're talking about now.
Maybe they won't give you strontium-90. That may be more of a, I think it's more of a...
iodine is probably worse. The initial iodine would have been worse. It's got the shortest half-life, and it's probably the most dangerous. But then strontium-90 is also one that's dangerous. They all can be dangerous. Depends on your exposure level and how long you're exposed to. Let's talk about the fuel rods for a second here. What I was talking about up till now, that Greg changed the subject on a little bit, is what is inside the reactor, inside that containment vessel. The spent fuel rods are basically fuel rods that were being used in that containment vessel, but that were now removed and put aside, usually right on site nearby, and they're put into pools of water. Now, in the case of Fukushima, they were in pools that were actually above the reactor, and some reactors are like that. It was a GE design, and that's pretty bad, because if you get a huge crack in that containment of where that water is, where those fuel rods is, you can leak all your water out, and then they could be exposed, and they could start heating up, and yes, they could cause a fire, and then you got a big problem. They start melting down. But usually they're put into pools. The better way, of course, is if they're in the ground And it's you look at it and it looks like a swimming pool, and you can stand right above them. The water is a great shielding. It's got mass to it. So yeah, they're maybe 15, 20 feet below the water level, and you can stand right up there and not look at them through the water. Oh wow, that's cool. And you wouldn't be hurt. I mean, if you stayed there a long time, you might get exposure, but you wouldn't be hurt. But if, like Greg says, if the water level does go down, if it evaporates. Now, I mean, I got to back up a little bit more again. The fuel rods are taken out. Now, when those fuel rods are taken out, they still have more than 90% of their nuclear energy still in those rods. So they still are, the nuclear power plant can't use them anymore. The type of light water reactors we're talking about here can't use those rods anymore after a certain point. And so they put them out, and then they're called spent fuel. And this is all usually what people refer to as, when you hear the term nuclear waste, this is usually what they're talking about. There's other types of nuclear waste too, stuff that's dumped in barrels in the ocean and stuff back in the 50s and 60s, but that's a whole different kind. It's a lower level. That's not as of importance here. The spent fuel rods are what usually is referred to as nuclear waste, and those are put in these pools. Now, as long as that water level stays in the pools, you're fine. They stay in there for, I can't remember how many long, it's like, is it 10 years? They stay in those pools of water depending, and they stay in there for a long period of time. And then they can be removed and put in what they call cold storage casks, which are basically, they entomb them in a concrete and steel thing. But then they don't need cooling anymore by any water, any secondary source. So it depends on the age. Now, the ones that are in the pool are the ones that are the most recent ones, and those are the ones you do have to keep covered with water. But the majority of our nuclear waste is actually rods that have been removed from those pools, put in dry cask storage, and they're sitting around waiting for our government to come up with a way to dispose of them. Because frankly, this whole thing about nuclear waste is a political issue, not a technological issue. Okay, so like Greg said, if these rods do lose their water and they burn down, first of all, they can burn down. It's not as easy to melt those down as it is the ones in the active reactor. But then again, the ones in the active reactor are shielded more than the ones, because the ones in the pools are basically just shielded by the water, depending on if they're above ground or underground. So if the water does evaporate and you do have a fire, you start melting the zirconium, I think the cladding.
It has zirconium in it. It's an alloy of zirconium called zircaloy.
That's the word I was looking for, zircaloy.
If the zircaloy is at room temperature, it's not going to burn, but when it's hot, it will burn on contact with air. And I've got Sandia reports where they did tests on them to show that they would do that. We've got 2 reports from Sandia National Laboratories on that. I've had some people try to dispute it, but I've got the test reports. So they will burn on contact with air. So I've never told people, I've never talked about the reactors in my channel here. I've always just talked about spent fuel rod pools, because that's where I see the threat.
Now let's continue on with the way you were going. I'm finally getting to the part where you want to hear. So if they start melting down, catch fire, if they don't keep them covered with water, that's going to happen eventually. I guess it depends how old they are, but it's going to happen. And then the smoke, and it'll be there. You're talking about strictly beta radiation now. You're not going to be talking about gamma radiation, which is the most deadly. Beta is less deadly. So then if you want to protect yourself, and again, those beta particles won't be suspended and go all right around the world or whatever. They're going to fall out fairly quickly. The closer you are to the plant, the more beta radiation you're going to get. So the farther you are away, and of course it's only downwind, it won't virtually no effect upwind. So it depends on which way the wind's blowing from where you are relative to the nuclear power plant. You may not be getting anything or very little, or it depends. If you're next door, you might be getting quite a bit, and it might be dangerous, and it might be wise to leave. Take some potassium iodate right away and leave if you can. Now, in an emergency situation, that might not be possible. So you would have to protect yourself from the beta radiation again. Masks, skin protection, wash your skin off if you do get it on your skin. Anything you eat should be covered before you eat it. In other words, if it's an apple exposed in the open, it's okay to eat that apple if you wash it off good first.
Let me inject a point just from a prepper standpoint and gardener standpoint. One of the things you should do, if you know this is going to happen, if you anticipate you're going to get an event like this, cover your compost piles, cover your garden beds with tarps and things like that. I think I mentioned this before. Cover those things, and after the event's over, remove those covers. The only thing I worry about with these fuel rod pools, you may not know when they're cooking off. You got to pay attention to which way the wind's blowing. And it may take a while. That's what I really worry about most. It's going to take a while for them to burn down as that water evaporates. And so you got a longer term event, and it's going to go with the wind, and the wind may shift on you too. So, So don't be in the prevalent downwind area from these plants. The further away you are, the better off you are. I know in Fukushima, the United States, they have a recommended 50-mile radius evacuation zone, but in Fukushima, they evacuated about 30 miles. And Craig here says, well, they didn't need it. Well, in that case, that's true. And they didn't need it for they had control of those fuel rod pools all along. They kept water on them. But if we have a full-blown grid down, it may be difficult to do.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. So you're absolutely right. The farther you are away, the better off you'll be. But if you are close enough where you think you're getting, and that's where the radiation detection come in handy, because then you know whether you're getting exposed or not. You just use the protection that I talked about here. Something in an apple, just wash it off. Now, to talk about food and gardening, which I know your channel is a lot about, if you can, immediately when something has happened, if something is harvestable enough to harvest it then. Because if it grows in that environment, it's going to be picking up radiation. Same with your animals. If your animals are out in the beta radiation, your animals are going to be picking up the particles, ingesting them, and they're going to be contaminated. So if you can, and you want to try to save that, you can harvest your animals right then. If you have if you have clean water, and there's a whole lot of problems doing that, but then you have to be really prepared to be able to do that. But that's for gardeners. Harvest everything as quickly as you can before it does start absorbing the radiation. A loaf of bread, perfectly fine if it's in the wrapper. If it's out exposed in the air, you can't really wash off bread, so you might as well forget about the bread. But if it's in the wrapper, you take it out and eat the bread, that's fine. Anything in a can is going to be fine, even if it's exposed to massive gamma radiation. In fact, most of the food you all eat right now, from the grocery store anyway, in the form of fruits and vegetables, has been irradiated with gamma radiation. Gamma radiation does not stay in the food. It goes through the food. It goes through that tin can, but it doesn't stay in the food. So when you eat the stuff in that can or that apple that has been exposed to gamma radiation, you don't get that radiation in your body. Just like when you step out of the x-ray machine, you don't measure as being radioactive when you step out of an x-ray machine, unless you have the radioactive dye, and that's a whole other situation.
So it might sterilize your food.
Well, that's what they do. That's why they irradiate it. It helps what they call irradiated food, which is most of your fruits and vegetables in the grocery store has been irradiated, where they expose it to gamma radiation, and it helps make the food last a little longer by killing a lot of the microorganisms on it. Remember, gamma radiation will kill a lot of things. And so that's what they're doing when they irradiate the food. It's trying to make it last longer. But anyway, so for gardening, that's what you would do. Masks, washing yourself off. You have a lot of clean water. Now, a lot of times we say you can survive off a gallon of water a day, but for certain things for hygiene, you may need more, and that's going to be difficult. The biggest thing, okay, let me think here. If I covered most everything about nuclear power plants, I'm not worried.
You're talking about the protection from beta particles, and that's good. Yeah, your clothing protects you, but people should know that if to decontaminate, you do need to remove that clothing. You may want to leave it outside if possible, and take a good shower.
Yeah, and keep your mask on that whole time. Don't take your mask off until you're away from all the dust, the clothing is being removed and so on. Keep your mask on.
Take the mask off before I took the shower, though.
But yeah, simple wash, soap and water is, in fact, when they call it the decontamination areas, all they usually are shower rooms. They may have a little more protection, but they're basically just shower rooms. There's not anything much more than that. So this is something easy you can do if you have enough water. Does the water come out of your tap where you can take a shower? You got to really plan for that. And that's one of the difficult things, because during a nuclear power plant incident, you may or may not have power, but during a nuclear blast, you probably won't. We haven't talked about EMP, but I know you covered a lot on your channel, so we don't really need to talk about that. But my opinion of this is more than likely in today's political climate, if we have an attack, a nuclear attack of some kind, it will probably, this is opinion here of mine, it'll probably be just for the EMP effect. In other words, they're going to kill more people long term with a few well-placed nuclear detonations in the atmosphere by knocking our grid out forever, or virtually forever. That's going to kill more people than any nuclear devices would, because really you get about 99% of those people in the district of criminals would have survived. And that's be the same worldwide, countrywide, where people would survive. But more people will die because we're addicted to electricity. We depend on that for everything. If that grid goes down, that's where the real trouble is. Not so much the radiation. It could be, depending where you are, but the grid being down is your bigger worry, I think, in my opinion, than any of these nuclear scenarios I talked about. We haven't even covered the dirty bomb yet, but I would be more worried about grid down which would be very easy for them to do. And by them, I mean China, I mean maybe even North Korea. It would be very easy for somebody to put our grid down and for a long time potentially. But there's also the cyber attacks. I'm not worried about the cyber attacks so much because frankly, I'm hoping somebody's smart enough with electrical engineering and say, oh, well, our computers are down. Well, let's take these two wires. They go here and these two wires go here. There, we got power again. Get away from these damn computers because those are what's going to really fail, especially during a cyber attack. But because remember we had power before we had computers, so this can be done. I just hope there's old school people enough know how to do what we need to do to get our power back in the case of a cyber attack.
I hate to tell you, but that's a big hope.
Well, I understand that, and I think our cars should never go on computerized. All the stuff that we have around us so computerized today. I think we're going in the wrong direction. I believe for survival purposes, we're going in the wrong direction. That's my opinion too.
I don't think the smart grid is so smart personally.
Yeah, and it's going to get worse, folks, because especially when they start eliminating fossil fuels and go more and more solar and more. But again, that's a different topic. I shouldn't get off on a tangent here. And to touch on this Ukraine thing right away, here's an idea. If they really wanted to, if Russia decided to attack Ukraine, I'm just giving a scenario. I don't really follow this type of political stuff much because I'm not really worried about it personally. If Russians started attacking Ukraine, it would be very easy for the U.S. to do a cyber attack on them and basically just stop their invasion. Whether or not they'd want to do that or admit that they could do that, I'm just saying they can do that now. They can cyber. Our militaries right now are techno babies. I don't think they could fight a war without a computer screen in front of them. So by shutting down their computers, you can basically stop, in today's modern warfare, you can basically stop an attack. Whether or not that'll happen or not, but by the same token, Russia can shut down everything over here with their computers as well. So it may not be a wise thing to do because they would probably retaliate pretty quickly. And we don't want this. I'm not as worried about cyber as I am the EMP though. But Russia, of course, can create an EMP, and we know this. And so can China and a lot of other countries if they wanted to. And that's your biggest danger, grid going down, because it will probably be going, unless it's a cyber attack. A cyber attack, more than likely, if they do it in a more conventional manner, it'll probably be back in a month or two. But the EMP destruction to the grid could take years, and that's depending on the scale of the EMP attack. It might cause little damage, it might cause a lot of damage. It depends on how close we get to what we call the Carrington event. So I think I've covered most briefly about the nuclear warheads and the nuclear power plant disasters. How about now the dirty bombs? The dirty bombs are the least of your concern. All a dirty bomb really is some nuclear waste. And if you want to call it, let's say somebody stole a spent fuel rod and they put explosives all in it and around it, and they put it in the middle of the district of criminals and blew it up. All you're doing there, it's not a nuclear detonation. All it is spreading of nuclear material that's radioactive. So if a dirty bomb is detonated, the actual physical explosion sends all the debris out and beta particles, and there could be some gamma as well in the immediate area, and really not much else. It depends on how much of it is atomized and goes up into the atmosphere. It would be very low, and it probably wouldn't be measurable even if you were just even a few blocks away. So a dirty bomb is more of a scare tactic. It's dangerous, especially you're more worried about being blown up by the explosion than you are the radiation. You'll contaminate an area of radiation for a few blocks that they might consider it a cleanup hazard and everybody's evacuated from that area. That's fine, but it really wouldn't be anything like a nuclear bomb, nothing whatsoever like a nuclear bomb. So with a dirty bomb, essentially you only have to worry about it if you're right there where you are affected by the bomb itself. Pretty much that's it. So I wouldn't worry whatsoever about a dirty bomb unless you happen to be, working in an area like a nuclear power, not nuclear power plant, a
city center or where they target,
military base or something. Yeah, then you may have to worry, but I wouldn't be worried about a dirty bomb whatsoever unless you're right there. So unless you have some questions, I don't want to take too long because I could go on forever. I've covered most everything about exposures and what to prepare for, how to prepare. We can talk about equipment if you want, or we can leave for another time, but that's the basics I think people need to know. Don't fall into the fear mongering, study a little bit, study something. Don't just go to YouTube University, go other places and learn about things that aren't trying to sell you something or fear mongering for whatever reason, whether it's for page views or views on a YouTube channel or monetization channels. try to go to places that aren't trying to sell you something for this type of information. And all my channels are not monetized. I don't make a penny off of my YouTube channels. I do, if you buy from me, I do make some money, but I don't try to sell anything, not necessarily. So I don't know. I don't even know the time because I don't see a time on here. You need to go, or do you want to continue on?
We can continue in a little bit. So one of the things I also tell people is if you have a blast, first don't look at it. And then I tell them that you're going to have a blast wave. You got to get down. You got to get down low. And when the blast wave passes over, and you mentioned this, you're going to get a back wave come back, a back blast. It's going to, because the pressure wave pushes out, and then as this mushroom cloud rises up, it's going to evacuate the air, and the air's got to come back rushing in the other direction. So you're going to get hit twice. So just be prepared for that. And yeah, the debris striking you is the biggest threat. Then it's kind of like tornadoes do that too. You can have a lot of threat from debris. Go ahead.
You're old enough to remember this. Duck and cover.
Yeah.
You're old enough to remember fallout shelters. I'm the same age probably as you, close to it. Duck and cover, fallout shelters, Cuban Missile Crisis, civil defense. These were all things that were common back in the day. And duck and cover, even though people like to laugh at it today, let me take a minute to explain this and use the example in Russia. In what was it? It's about 9 years ago now. A meteor hit Russia. It was unexpected. People saw this blinding light. What the hell's going on? They ran to the windows to see what this blinding light was, and lo and behold, boom, the big shockwave comes, blows windows out for miles, and people were injured. Nobody died, but see, you'll get that with a nuclear blast too. You'll get a flash of light first. The very first indication will probably be a flash of light. You won't hear anything, won't see anything except a really white light. And the human nature is to run to the window, find out what's going on, when it should be duck and cover. You see that flash of light, you get down, and because there's a blast wave coming.
The grass shards is what got most people, the glass.
But nobody died from that, luckily. But a lot of people got injured. In fact, there was a story about a school teacher that saw that flash of light and ordered all her kids to get under a desk. She was injured because she stayed upright, but all the kids were safe. She realized it was something. She maybe thought it was a nuclear bomb, but whether it's a meteor or a nuclear bomb, that response would have been still correct. So the covering under your desks, the under the desks thing was basically because if the building were to collapse, all those desks might prevent kids from getting crushed under there. And then you make your way to the shelters afterwards. So you can laugh all you want about the duck and cover today. It seems like it might be kind of ridiculous because you were kind of led to believe it was ridiculous, but it's actually a very good life-saving measure that you might be able to utilize yourself, because that blast wave is what's going to kill a lot of people. The flash of light won't kill anybody. You get a lot of radiation with that flashlight, but it's only for an instant, the high level stuff. But then that blast wave is what you're more concerned about. So stay down until you feel that second wave going back over you, then make your way to your shelter if you have it, or organize to whatever you have to do to get away from the radiations to coming. So the duck and cover is still very important. People like to laugh at it.
Yeah, well, the flashlight might blind you. You don't want to look at it.
Yeah.
So, but that's the first. That's going to be everybody's gut. That's going to be everybody's reaction. The first thing you want to do is look at it, but try not to do it. And then find a low place. Yeah, really duck and cover. That's what it is. You got to find a low place to get down, so the debris don't hit you.
Yeah,
and that's still valid. That's a very valid thing, and I've mentioned that.
And that will be people that are fairly, like, probably within a mile or so, mile or two from the epicenter, or the ground zero. Those are the people that would have to worry about flying debris more. If you're 20, 30 miles away, you won't have to worry about that. You may have broken windows, but more than likely, you're not going to have a lot of debris flying around in the air. At some point, there won't even be any broken windows. It's not like it destroys the whole earth. Again, remember, they used to test these things out in the desert in the open atmosphere for decades, and they didn't have to evacuate anybody from neighboring states. So don't fall into the fear mongering.
Yeah, I've had friends that have been involved in some of those tests. So some of the things to think about is just to know that you don't go downwind after an event like this, because that fallout, that's where it's going. And two, if you're under the cloud or anywhere close to it, get the heck out. Just get away from that. So a lot of it is just getting away as fast as you can, or getting under cover once this fallout is around. If you're in the fallout zone, you got to get under cover. If you're got anywhere where the gamma rays are, yeah, you need to get masked between you and the vent, or behind, like he said, underground, either or. But the shock wave is going to hit, and you got to be prepared for that. I was going to say something else. We trained in the military. I was a distinguished honor graduate from my NBC school that I went to, and they trained us how to estimate the yield of it, where the fallout would go, and they even trained us to go across the fallout zone, just putting sandbags on the bottom of the jeeps, because they wanted us to operate and fight even during the nuclear war. We were trained to do that. Now, it's not something I would advise anybody else to do. If you don't cross that stuff unless you just absolutely have to save your or somebody else's life, because that's nasty stuff. You don't need that. But you might want to spend just a little moment talking about the source of the alpha waves, because that's the stuff that's easily blocked, and and that's basically like light and the gamma rays, and as he mentioned, the beta is going to be attached to particles, and that's where your fallout is.
Yeah, well, the alpha isn't for a nuclear war scenario or any of the scenarios I talk about. Alpha isn't really the big danger, and I don't have the detectors for alpha, for instance, are so expensive that I generally don't care. I have a few in front of me, but they aren't something that I even try to sell, because it's not something for the preppers even really need to be concerned about much, other than the fact, the knowledge that it might be there, but it won't be in the quantities there that's going to hurt you real bad. And the mask is going to protect you. If you're protecting yourself from beta, you're going to be protected from alpha. You won't need the rain suit for alpha. You won't even really have to wash off. I don't think you have to. No, it's not really a particle, so you don't really have to wash off for the alpha. But even a piece of paper will stop the alpha. So it isn't as big of a concern. I don't want to get deep into the science of this, because I don't even know the science very well, the actual the nuclear physics about how to describe how all these affect the body and how they penetrate is any more than I've already said.
I cover some of it. I did a video called Nuclear Bug Out, and everybody can go to my Nuclear Bug Out video, and you can see where I go into describing each radiation form, and I talk about what a person can survive dose wise and things like that. And I talk about shielding and how much shielding is effective and things like that. So I cover some of that kind of stuff. But what we have from Craig here is a good operational look into this for what to do to survive and what the real threats are. How far away from even if you had, let's say if you had a plant spent fuel rod pool that's going up in smoke, how far away do you think you can be from that and be safe? What would you say would be the safe distance if you're downwind?
Downwind would be, downwind is the caveat there.
So if I'm downwind, how far do I need to be safe from a spent fuel rod pool
burning? We don't have any definite numbers. It will depend on a lot of things. It'll depend on the weather too, not just how much wind or direction, but how intense it is. Is it raining? Is it what's the temperatures out? These particles will tend to drop out pretty quickly. If you're more than 20 or 30 miles away from a plant, I wouldn't worry about that, even downwind. I wouldn't worry about.
I'm 26 miles from Browns Ferry.
I wouldn't worry about that. Browns Ferry, I don't know specifics about that particular plant, but
it's got 3 reactors, been running decades. They got a lot of stuff there.
And it will be within containment.
I don't worry about the dry cask. I don't worry about that. Just the stuff in the spent fuel. I'm not worried about the reactors, just the stuff in the spent fuel rod.
Are the fuel rods, are the spent fuel rods, are they in pools above ground or underground?
They're in the ground, but it's still in they're just in a building with a sheet metal roof over it. They got 20 feet of water. As long as that water's there, they're fine. But when that water evaporates, I'm worried about the stuff that comes up out of it when it catches on fire.
Depending on our society in general, when something like this possibly happens, if everybody in the nuclear power plant says, "Hey, I'm out of here. I got family," and nobody's watching anything, then that's a whole different scenario. Whereas if it's something like a hurricane or a tsunami or something like that, where the crew sticks around and tries to save things, then even if they lost all power, a simple bucket brigade could. I mean, it'd take a lot of people, but you could literally do that, because nuclear power plants are near large bodies of water, and they're done that for exactly things like this, safety reasons. Potentially, you can get portable aircraft coming in, dropping water drops. You can have firemen hosing it off. You could have diesel generators come in. There's a lot of ways you could keep that fuel rods covered. But again, that's the caveat there, is if everybody hasn't just gone home.
So there's two kind of things. There's the single event, like something happens there. I don't worry so much about that because like Fukushima, they brought in the fire trucks and everything else. They kept water on those spent fuel rod pulls, even though we were worried about some of them cracking because they were kind of listing over being built on top of the reactor building that was highly damaged. But that's not the problem here. But what I worry about is if you have a nationwide grid down, everything's down, the people, you just don't have stuff coming in. Everybody's got problems everywhere. And you're going to be running out of fuel. Everything's going to be breaking down. So I'm looking at, what happens in a scenario like that when you can expect, there's a pretty good chance that stuff's going to go up in smoke. Maybe some locals can form a bucket brigade and keep it going. That would be a part of the hope, or some other means to keep water there for 10 years, I guess. That's a lot of bucket lifting, but that's doable. But let's say she burns and that stuff goes up in smoke. And let's just let's look at worst case scenarios. Let's say the atmosphere, we're not raining out. How far away do you think a person will need to be safe if you're downwind?
20 to 30 miles. I mean, that's just a guess. I mean, again, it's just.
Well, I'm kind of right between that. I'm at 26.
It hasn't ever happened. First of all,
well, we haven't had a nationwide grid down either.
Right, 70 years we haven't had. In fact, no one in world history has been injured by stored nuclear waste or spent fuel rods. That's something to think about. But could it happen? Yes, it could happen. The likelihood of it happening are extremely small, but a grid down, this certainly presents a whole new challenge that we have our engineers overall seem to have ignored as much of a possibility. There are some contingency plans in place that I've heard from people in the military, but I'm not very satisfied with some of the responses that I hear. And you probably heard these same things from military personnel. You may even know a lot of insider information that I don't know.
I work with some of these military people, and the ones I know are just as concerned as I am.
And their basic answer is to me, well, we start replacing components, start pulling circuit boards and changing out circuit, and then we'll get the helicopter to run. That's not very encouraging to me.
Well, that don't work when you don't have a supply chain. If the whole grid goes down, we got problems, a lot of them. So,
yeah, because it's much easier to prepare for something like a hurricane.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what it's set up to do. A single event here, there, but a nationwide event like an EMP grid down is a whole different enchilada. And my problem with that is there's too many different causes that could lead to it, including a solar CME, a Carrington type event, or a nuclear event, an EMP attack from another country. There's just too many root causes, and there's too much tension in the world today. And it's just the politicians and the power companies in particular have dragged their feet on this. So we don't have the hardening of the grid that we should have. What I've been pushing for since you attended one of my power grid defense conferences 6 years ago, nothing much has happened. It's been things passed like legislation, but they never got really enacted because of the bureaucracy in the industry and what we might call the big state. You might refer to that as deep, but there's just a lot of inertia that's hindered getting done what needs to be done.
Well, we've known about this since at least 1859, right?
Yeah, well, the Carrington event, yeah. But
we haven't, when we built our grid, we didn't keep that in mind. I don't know, that doesn't sound very fun, but.
No, it's not built for that. It's not built to handle that right now. There's, the industry will tell you, don't worry your pretty little heads, but they base stuff on testing unloaded transformers. It's when they're loaded that you're going to have the issue, because you're going to have this wave coming in on top of the power they're already operating on. So the test I've been running to try to assure everybody is nonsense. It don't even matter. It's non sequitur. But a lot of people don't realize that. But those of us that are in the industry that know about this kind of stuff, we look at it and go, oh my God, they're really, it's a smoke screen. So we're trying to draw evidence of that and draw attention to it just to get the job done. It would cost about the cost of a B-2 bomber to get all our big high voltage transformers properly shunted to keep them from getting fried. That's the ones I worry about the most. A lot of the other stuff can be replaced. Those things take forever. So, and that would bring our whole nation to a halt. So we don't need that to happen. And some of us are trying to prevent it. The problem is we may be running out of time due to some of the stuff going on in the world. Let's hope and pray that these don't take the worst direction, but it is in the doctrine, the military doctrine of countries like Russia, China, and North Korea, that if they have a war with us, the first thing they're going to do is attack us with an EMP. They've already said that. Even Iran has said they've got sleeper cells stationed here in America to take out 20 of our substations. So that's been stated. So these are just things that we have to keep in mind, that we do have risk, the real risk, and that's why I tell people to get prepared. That's really what got me on this preparedness track anyway, and that's why I started out with a prevention track of working power grid defense. It's seeing the foot dragging on that's led me more to push the prepping. And I've always been, like you did, we call it survivalism when I got into this. And I always did it just because I just thought it was a smart thing to do. I always had extra food and this stuff and that stuff, just because I thought it was prudent, kind of like an insurance policy. But the more I've got into it, the more I realized that we are at risk. And now with the international situation, I think politicians are stupid and blind. I think that's the case all over the world. You must have to lose 20 IQ points to rise to the top in world politics. So because they just don't have their head screwed on their shoulder. They could do a lot of things a lot better if they would do it. And there's kind of a TV series out there. I've never seen it. It's something about Don't Look Up, or I don't know what the exact name of it is, but it's a scenario. There's a asteroid coming to smack the Earth, and these scientists are trying to warn people about it, and all the politicians are more worried about how it's going to play out in their polls and their re-elections and all that kind of stuff that they always keep on their mind. So I think that's kind of a parody movie or a series, but there seems to be a lot of truth to that, unfortunately. But yeah, that's just, and I think it's human nature in part there. But so what we've come here today is to bring you guys some sense of realism for what these radiological events can be, that they can be survivable, but they are a risk, they're a threat, but they can be survived, especially if you prepare and keep your head on your shoulders and act accordingly. But it is an added if you have an EMP event with all this other things you worry about EMP, this is just an added complication to make it worse if you got these things going on in the vicinity of these power plants. And there's a lot of them here in the eastern part of the country. So just keep that in mind. And so I've been warning people about that aspect of it for some time, because that's something that's been ignored, and it will affect food grown in those areas and things like that. So you don't want any food coming from an area where you've had fallout from either a nuclear blast or one of these power plants cooking off their spent fuel rod pools. So all that said, you want to talk a little bit about equipment and things for detecting these events? Do you want to go into that briefly? And we might have to do another video and do a Q&A in the future with the audience. There's some things you'd like to bring up. If I wanted to be able to know what's out there in the environment, what sort of devices should I use for radiological detection?
Well, back in the day when we were worried about nuclear war, again, the biggest danger is gamma radiation. And that's what all our civil defense was geared towards. And this is probably a lot of people recognize something like this. I get it right, the camera correctly.
Oh, yeah.
The civil defense logo, this is called a radiological survey meter. It's not a Geiger counter. It's the biggest mistake everybody makes. They don't understand, because all the movies will call this a Geiger counter. It's not. This detects high level gamma radiation. They would have these in the shelters. Police departments would have this, fire departments. You'd have them in the basements of any type of government building. Banks and even had some sometimes. I got some of the labels I have on them are from all over the place. These were available for first responders because and in the shelters, they would have these in the shelters. So when everybody got in the shelter, when we had shelters, now we just wait for FEMA to come give us a trailer, I guess. We would go to these shelters, and somebody in charge would know how to use this. They'd go outside and measure the levels of radiation each day or whatever until it got low enough to where the numbers on the scale would go down enough so they could be outside. And then what they would do is they would give the people who did go outside, because after a few days, they probably could start going outside, or maybe even the first day for a limited amount of time. So they would give everybody something called a pocket dosimeter. If I can figure out where camera's over here.
I bought one of those from you, or a few of these.
You would get one of these, which tells you your dose. This tells you in Roentgens per hour. This is like your speedometer. This is like your odometer. They would give these, and there's a scale in there. When you look through them, there's a scale that shows the amount of radiation that they've accumulated. You put it in your pocket, and you keep looking at it when you're outside, and whoever was in charge of the shelter, after seeing what these numbers were, they say, well, you probably can only stay out there a couple hours. I want you back here before the numbers on this read 30 or 50 or whatever number. And so they could keep looking at it and get back to the shelter before they get too much radiation, even though the radiation might be very high. 30 or 50 Roentgens is quite a big exposure, but you won't die from that. And so you come back in a reasonable amount of time, and they would reset this with a device like this. And they would reset it, and then they would send it back to somebody else, go outside, look for food and water, help their loved ones or whatever, clean up debris, whatever the task was. But this is only for gamma, this is only for high level gamma radiation. What people confuse a Geiger counter as, this you can see clearly says Geiger counter on it. Geiger counters, the easily distinguishable part is this wand on the top that has a cable. Now, a Geiger counter, because this will detect beta and gamma radiation, but it will only detect, and it's a little stiff. Let me try this one. This probe is what you use to detect. Now, in this device here, which I showed you, this is the most common, and this is what I would recommend if you're worried about nuclear war. I would say this is what you want first, but a lot of people disagree because a lot of people want to play around with a Geiger counter, because a Geiger counter you can play with, because this is 10,000 times more sensitive than what they call a radiological survey meter. It doesn't have that wand on top, you see, no cable. It has something inside called an ionization chamber. This is for 10,000 times more sensitive. The problem with this is, and you can detect beta or gamma depending which way the shield is on this. I don't know if this one will, it's been a year since I've seen this particular unit. You can see I just opened up, and now you can see the probe in there, and then I can close it off where you don't see the probe. That would be now shielded, so that would be measuring gamma. With the shield open, I'd be measuring beta radiation, because now it doesn't have that metal, because it won't, the gamma goes through the metal, but the beta won't. In any case, this is for measuring low levels of beta and gamma radiation. The problem with this is, for a survival situation, it's okay to have in the shelter, but if you have it outside and you have a high level event, if you're reading 20 Roentgens or 100 Roentgens or 500 Roentgens on this will be totally useless, because it will be reading 0. This will be saturated, it will be done. This is not the device you want. It's good for inside the shelter, you can see what you're getting. If you get stuck with a Geiger counter and that's all you have, and by the way, Geiger counters, this is a couple more modern versions of Geiger counters. There's all sorts of, these would be probably destroyed in an EMP, maybe not. There's a lot of argument online about that. But these older analog devices would not be. If you get stuck with a Geiger counter and that's all you have, the best way to use it is go ahead and turn it on, close the gamma shield, or the beta shield rather, slowly walk up the stairs from your shelter, presumably you're underground. And if you watch that needle and it just jumps up real quick and then goes back down, you know it's got too much radiation, because it won't register. It'll saturate the tube and it won't register. So you don't want to get stuck with a Geiger counter. The electronic ones might read OL if they work at all. They might read overload or fault or something if they work at all. Again, because the EMP, you got computers inside those modern ones. They may not work. So ideally, in my opinion, nuclear war. Now, if it's a nuclear power plant accident, this is what you want, unless you're right there. But remember, you won't be getting any gamma radiation from a nuclear power plant, even if it's the pools melting down. Fukushima right now, you got about 4,000 people that work there every day, right on the site, and have been for 10 years, 11 years. So no, that's not dangerous living near a nuclear power plant, unless the containment is lost or the pools are melting, the spent fuel pools. But if it's a nuclear power plant you're worried about, then yes, you want a Geiger counter. Now, if it is a nuclear power plant accident and it wasn't caused by an EMP, then one of these modern devices would suffice, because they will still be working. It would be lower radiation, and these are good for beta and gamma radiation. One that has a pancake probe on it is also good for alpha. These are much more expensive. This is a $600 unit. So those are much more expensive for alpha, but most of what you call Geiger counters will be good for beta and gamma radiation. And they do X-ray too, but X-ray is the same as gamma for all intents and purposes, what we're talking about. You also have some newer devices, and I don't have them out of the packages. These are ones you wear either on a keychain or right on your body. And these will just start automatically alarming if there's something happened and nobody told you, and nobody on the news knows about it. You'd know even before the police did, if you had little devices like this that you could wear or have in your house. So in a nutshell, that's basically it. You don't need anything. But what I do suggest you need, one thing you do need isn't equipment at all, besides maybe a rain suit, masks, hygiene like wash, but you also probably want to have a bottle of potassium iodine. It's a pill you take. It's an iodine, a form of iodine. It saturates your thyroid, prevents you from absorbing the radioactive iodine, flush it from your system. It can protect you from beta radiation only, not gamma. It doesn't matter how you pick the whole bottle of pills, it's not going to protect you from the gamma. Gamma goes right through your body, remember? So a bottle of potassium iodate, and you don't need 10 of them. All you need is one. Yeah, one bottle is probably good for your whole block, believe it or not. It depends how they come. Sometimes they come in these little blister packs, other times they come in bottles. You don't need a whole lot of them because really you only take one a day, depending, look at the label, but usually it's only one a day and there might be 30 pills in there. If you're having to live more than a month in some kind of nuclear situation, you didn't prepare right. You shouldn't be there. Really, you should only need it for a week or two at the most. It depends what's going on. But if it's a nuclear power plant melting down and you have the radiation coming from a spent fuel pool that Greg's worried about, take them immediately before you're exposed. You have to take it before you're exposed. They don't do any good if you take it after you're exposed. So you take it before you're exposed and then leave the area if you can, or if it's wise to do so. Not every time you should be leaving the area. All your preps are at home. You can't throw everything in your car fast enough to get out, get out of Dodge. Leaving is a really tough decision. But for most nuclear events, I wouldn't leave unless it's a nuclear power plant and you're nearby and you're getting the beta radiation from spent fuel pools. That's probably the only reason I would leave. And if you could confirm you were getting enough to cause you any damage. If nobody's tending to those things, I don't know. I don't know if I've seen any research to suggest how long they would be burning. If everybody just got out of Dodge and left the plant, I don't know if it would take weeks or months to burn down. That I'm not sure of. But if there's anybody tending the plant at all, you probably don't have anything to worry about from spent fuel rods. Okay, now I can't hear you.
Yeah, I did talk to a nuclear safety engineer who worked at these plants in Knoxville for TVA. He thought it would be some good long period of time, but he thought that stuff would just melt down and be a smoldering mass.
Would it be weeks or months?
Yeah,
maybe
even months. So
okay.
yeah, this could be this could be a gift that keep on giving for way too long. That's what worried me about it. That's what got my attention. Is if it was something that's going to be like a nuclear device going off and be over soon, you wouldn't worry about it as much. But if it's just out there continuously given, that's a gift you probably don't want. So we covered a lot of ground here. There's probably a lot more we could have covered. I've done other videos where I've talked this and similar topics, and I think y'all can put all this in context. And I can bring, if you're interested, leave comments below, and I can bring Craig back on here for a follow-up. Also, Craig, you can, after I post this video, you can check it and look at the comments and respond to them yourself if you'd like to. That'll be left in the comments that people put up after us. I'm probably going to post this probably tomorrow, earlier in the day, most likely. I'll just have to see. It's going to depend on a lot of other things I'm juggling. It's a little, it probably won't do as well if I post it at night because I've still got to process it and do a lot of stuff. I've got another video uploaded I'll probably post first. So it's just ready, very little to do to post that one. So I really appreciate you coming on. I appreciate your perspectives. What I would like for you to do is to send me your links so I can put them in my show notes to your sites where you sell your devices and your 2 YouTube channels.
Okay.
All right. And everyone, I want to thank y'all for watching. Stay safe. And just as I always say, keep your eyes wide open and head on a swivel because we don't know what's coming. But right now, we're living in very interesting times. If you'd like to stay on for a minute, Craig, after I end the video. So for all of you who have been watching, again, I say thank you very much. And Greg out. Let's see. Hang on.